All right. Cool. So, this chapter, if you go into your content and then PowerPoint from Publisher, we're looking at the chapter 3 one. And this one again is talking about cascading style sheets and the CSS. And we'll see a lot of these content here, ID selectors and class selectors. You'll notice that the names are different, but the way that CSS works with them is pretty much identical. And this concept of cascading, we'll see how we can kind of have this. Cascading is a nice way to look at it, but I kind of think of it like stacking plates on top of each other. When we get to that, that will make more sense. But essentially, if you determine a style earlier, and then you redetermine that style later, that newest style will override it. And for the homework capstone project one, which I really want to focus on, the third file uses an external CSS file. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at how we can link up an external file and then make it work with our CSS. Cool. So to get started with these concepts, I can link this in the chat. If you'd like to go ahead and make another um HTML file, I still have the one called practice. And some of us might have. What I'll do for this lecture is, because I'm kind of sick of Notepad myself, I'm going to use VS Code. And if you're not familiar with VS Code, I'll put a link in the chat for us here. This is a really nice editor. Sullivan was using it, and I know a few others were using it too. So this is the link to it there. And if you're on Windows or Mac, there's two other ways that it works for both of them. And VS Code is a really nice way to go ahead and actually get your code to edit easier. So if you right click on my HTML file and I open it with code after I have it installed, you'll notice that it looks a lot nicer. And again, every time let me actually get rid of the style stuff here. I'm just going to make a basic body that just says hello. You'll notice there if I open up, it gives me actually every element in HTML that's there with an explanation of it. So you don't need to look at W3 too much. And if I have an open one, it will automatically put a closing one. So some of us might have seen this before, already using it. And you'll also notice that it kind of keeps you tabbed in. Whoops, daisy. It keeps you tabbed in pretty well. So it won't be too different each time you run it. Awesome. So after I head and I do that, we'll see my hello world there is working just fine. So what I want to do with this VS Code in this chapter is kind of explore these concepts of CSS and HTML. Again, we saw that the first project was very focused on, excuse me, using these different types of elements like mark and bold and strong to make the appearances shift a little bit. But you'll notice that HTML isn't really that powerful when it comes to appearances. It also a little bit old school. Like if you make a website only using HTML, it's going to look like one from the 2000s. So CSS is one that goes ahead and only focuses on the appearance of a web page. So if you want to make a really neat web page, and just as a little overview of what could be possible with it, CSS also uses a lot of animations. I wonder if there's a website that will actually show it there. Okay. Yeah, so let me pull this up for us really quick. See here, based on me moving my mouse, it kind of reveals an image. There's a bunch of them here. You can see it kind of like brings in this like scroll. This is all done using CSS. So CSS is a way to like make animations happen. And you can see here, you can make a nice like home page for your website as well. Now, what we're doing won't be as intensive as this, of course. If you're interested in it, but the thing I want to show off is that you can actually go to the demo here, and you're able to look at all the code that's there. Now, you'll see that there's some code we're not familiar with here, which is fine. But we'll go ahead and hopefully we'll get to a point where you'll understand how to use this. And more importantly, you don't need to make this from scratch. You can kind of grab some things from these websites and then put them into your own. So there's a few things in CSS that we do. And this is just kind of a concept of reinforcing that CSS is about the appearance, whereas HTML is about the content. Cool. Now, the thing about CSS, and you'll notice that we made a style sheet on Tuesday. It's separate from HTML for the most part, and the reason why that is that we want to keep it at the top or in an external file. So if you want to make changes, it's quick to do it. So that's why we have these different versions. And the general rule here is that CSS works with selectors. Now, a selector is another term for element in HTML. So you can either create your own selector, or you could go ahead and make one, built into HTML. So some selectors you might have seen so far are like P for paragraph, or LI for line item. There's a bunch of different selectors we could use. And you'll see here, HR is another selector that we could work with as well. So, without like talking too much about it there, that's kind of the general idea, is we want to focus on these selectors with our elements. So to go ahead and get started here, I created a new body with a paragraph tag, and I'll go ahead and I'll just make my new, let me make this a bit bigger on our screen too. Sorry. Oh, one more thing. I know, I think Joel asked about GitHub. You'll see VS Code ask about GitHub immediately. So you can actually link up GitHub with Visual Studio Code as well. I'll show us how to do that when we talk about GitHub and in a supplemental one. But let's go ahead and I added in this HR code. We pull up this guy. Now, if I run my website, you'll see I get a pretty decent line at the top. Let me go ahead and make this. Let me add a paragraph tag on top of it too. Straightforward, what we've already been doing. We can see now that we have hello world twice and then a line between them. So again, that's fine. And what we might have been doing so far is, you know what, I want to change the style. So this is our CSS declaration. If you're making CSS though, general idea is to keep it at the very top. So you either keep your CSS, that is not style, sorry. Keep your CSS at the one place at the top inside of your header. You can also, this is why last we talked about how forgiving HTML is. You can put it here as well, but it's good practice just for like if you're troubleshooting code together with me or with other students, keep it at the top and then keep it in the same area so we can see it. Now, how does this selector actually work? Well, the way CSS works is it says, okay, you know what? Go ahead and define a selector for me. And after you define the selector that you want, you're going to go ahead and talk a bit about what's going to be different with that selector. So what I'm going to change here, let's go ahead and do the example of it. We'll have the width, and then let me make the width 50 pixels here like this. Now you'll notice there's a few things going on. First of all, anytime that you have a selector, you're going to have them between the brackets that are here, so the curly brackets, and then inside of that you're going to have the the element and attribute that you're changing. Cool. So what I'll do now is let me go ahead and open up my practice. You'll see here that my width is much shorter, so that's just the basic one. This is 50 pixels. Let me make it percentage. There we go. It's a bit larger. Now, there's a keyword that we haven't used just yet, and it's the asterisk one. And this asterisk one, essentially what that says is go ahead and select everything inside of my, select every attribute. And what we can say here now is this text align to center. We'll now see that everything inside of our code is now aligned to the center. Okay, so that's kind of your catch-all attribute. If you're getting a bit lazy, you don't want to do any all of them. And one more thing I wanted to showcase here is that each selector that you pick is going to have a property and a value item. Now you'll see here the general rules for syntax. You don't need to worry about it specifically for these. Oh yeah, question. Anything that I'm typing that I'm gonna open the keys, the brackets. Perfect. Absolutely, yeah. So a selector in CSS is an element in HTML. You can consider it that way. So these guys here, yep. No, well, we call them elements in HTML. So selectors. So what we will get into soon is this concept of ID, which can be considered a selector. And oh, let me just a little bit more, and I'll show you that there when we have a custom selector essentially. But they're not called selectors in HTML. They're either called elements or IDs, really. The terminology is a little different, but it's the same idea there. Does that make sense? Yes, exactly. So selector would be an ID for an element. Okay. And now you don't necessarily need an ID to do it though, right? You can actually go ahead and define, you can select the p elements like this, and now every single paragraph tag is selected for me. Hi, Boondy. Yep, is this, so I have the asterisk and that selects everything, and then the HR select just the height and row. Okay. So again, this is the basic format for your CSS. And again, the general idea is property and value. What I want to showcase one more time, there's a few different ways to do it. If you're using Notepad, it might be harder. I'm sorry, I kind of ditched Notepad halfway through it. But one thing I want to showcase is that, as a general rule of thumb, if VS Code will automatically put these beneath each other, but if you're doing it on a single line, the way that you do it, let's say I want to also change the background color, and in VS Code also has this nice thing of changing the all these colors too. Let me say I like the cadet blue, or I'll just call it white for the time, or let me just call it black. You'll see my VS Code automatically does it, but if you're not doing it on top of each other, if you're doing it side by side, you put a semicolon and delineate the property and the value for each one. So property one, value one, property two, value two, and so forth, right? Property tree, value tree. VS Code again does it kind of for me like this, unfortunately, but again, these are just random things I'm adding in. You can add in your own properties and values with that as well. Okay. It looks like it didn't actually change anything for me, unfortunately. Oh, I didn't realize you could do that. Let's try this way. Okay, so I won't change it there. The HR might not be the best one. Let me go ahead and try to add this into here as well. Let me take this guy up from here. Cool. Okay, so now I increase the size, and all of them are red background. Cool. Okay, so this is general CSS, and what I want to focus on as well. Let's see here. I don't want to bore everyone with all these items here. Cool. So this is the so Saul brought up a good point. Is there's selectors in HTML? So there's two terms that we can look at: classes and IDs. So classes in general are a way that we can go ahead and match all elements with a particular class using a class selector. So what do I mean by a class? So essentially, this is easy enough for us where we have, let me go ahead and just make this, let's keep that as an asterisk. Text in center, background color white. Let's say that I have a paragraph tag. Oops. So I want to change, this paragraph up here to have a different color. So let's make this like aquamarine color. Okay. Um, that's actually that hurts my eyesight. Let me make it red. Okay. Nice. Okay, so I made it red and it's straightforward, but an issue here is how do I make this guy down here blue? I want them to be different colors. So what we used to do usually is, okay, you know what? I have a paragraph tag here. I'm gonna say style is equal to um maybe I could do color blue. This might work for me. That's easy enough, but what if we also had a div here like so, and I also want to make the div background blue as well. Let me type this in. And for these small examples, sometimes it's hard to see what's going on, and you'll notice that my paragraph again is red down here, and I don't want it to be red. I want this background to be blue, and so forth. What you can do essentially is this concept of classes. And so a class essentially will group different elements together in your HTML. So the issue here is that this applies to all p tags, and I don't want it to. I only want it to apply to certain classes. So what we could do here is actually go ahead and create our own class inside of HTML. And the way that we do that is I'm going to delete this style color blue from here. And I'm going to create a class that is equal to, I'll call this one blue background, something like that. I'll put a space between there as well. And you'll surround it as a string. You know what? Let me, for simplicity's purposes, let's call it blue. So I have this class called blue, and what I can do now after I've defined this class is up here in my style selector, I can actually go ahead and tell my VS Code to go ahead and edit this class here. And the way we'll do it there is that we'll actually also not only need to add in the name of it, but we'll need to put this little period mark in front of it. Let's try this one more time. We'll see now that my blue class, it used to be white, but now it's kind of the same color as this guy here. What I could try to do now is let me go ahead and change the background color or the color of this guy to blue. There we go. So this guy now has the class of blue. What happens if I add this class onto this paragraph tag down here? Oops. Nice. Does everyone see how I'm now getting this blue piece of text here as well? So that's what classes are doing for us. So classes are a way to group different terms together that might not be there. Another important one is let's say we could make something like a red background. And so what I'll say is I'll make a new class equal to red. So what I can define up here is red, and then I could say background color is red, like so. Now we'll see that my red text is up there. It's completely red in this paragraph. But another cool thing is that this doesn't need to be for paragraph. If I apply the class to my div down here, we'll see that it, oh, this guy not putting in the background. Usually we can apply it to the divs too. But in general, this is another way to group them. And when we see IDs, this should be another way to do it as well. Let me see. Let me try one more thing here for us. Oh, it's just not applying it at all. Okay, we can come back to that one there. Oh, sure. No worries. There's two of you. Cool. Sure, no worries. Okay, so if I, again, I can go ahead and say, another P more test. Get a red. There we go. Cool. So again, everyone, this is essentially how we can make these divs happen. And again, this is neat because what you can do, let me just go ahead and say color white, like so. When you make those edits, you'll see that they pop up like this as well. Okay. Now, can we usually only have one class? No, you should be able to be apply multiple classes to it. Let's see here. Actually, let me double check one thing. Turn that blue. Cool. And usually the most of the classes is what you would do here. They help you pick out which specific ones to apply to. You can also do different classes for different unique instances. So let's go ahead and mess around with two more headers here. So I'm going to make a H1 header. One. And then I'll also make one underneath it, H2 header. Okay, so my headers are there, that's fine. What I can also do now is to make a class for each of these. let's just say, I think we could just make a basic one. Let's just call it, header. I'll call it header for the time being, so I'm not too, I'm not too creative. So let's go ahead and just call it class. And essentially what I want to showcase here is based on the class, you can pretty much apply different class styles to it as well. So it's pretty unique. What I mean by this is that if I go ahead and I declare my header up here and I change the background color to be, let's call it goldenrod or something, and then the font, the front color will be something like, let's try to make it nicer, maybe something like teal, like so. So that looks okay for us right now, but maybe I want to change the color of this guy. We might need to put a style in here, or what we could also do is essentially say, keeping this header class the same, I can copy this style and say something like the H1 header is going to have a teal background, and this guy right here, let's just, maybe I can call it cayenne or something. Cool. And as everyone see now, it goes ahead and it changes based on what I have here. So essentially, this is saying, okay, if you have an element that is a part of the class header, and it is a H1 element, apply this style. If you have a header element, and it is a part of the H2 class, apply this style, which is what happens. Otherwise, if you have a normal header, let's just make this black, like a normal header. If I go ahead and just say H stream, now it will apply that, oops, daisy, let me actually call the class. So now it will apply the kind of default header there. Okay, cool. So I kind of we went through this a bit quickly. How are folks feeling with this CSS stuff and these different styles? This is for classes. Are folks feeling okay with classes, or is this a bit confusing?
Can you repeat since it was mentioned by can you repeat um what happened to H3 and why it only got affected by the header, not
Absolutely. So what we're doing here with this type of style is that you can not only make a class selector, but you can do an element type prefix. And what we mean by element type prefix is that if you have an element that belongs to a class, you can sure. So let's go ahead and let me actually read this quickly one more time. So what I'll do here,
can you just repeat
oh yeah, absolutely. Let me I'll put the code that I currently have inside of the Zoom chat if folks want to just copy that message over. I'll also, you know what? I'll do this. This is easier. Let's do this way. There we go. Let's just download that HTML file. Okay. So to get started with this, let's just go ahead and I'm gonna make a H1 attribute, right? And basic enough, I have this header one that goes ahead and tells me this is what this one is. And again, if we go ahead and we say header two, like so, now we can see I get my header 2 as well. So what we've been doing so far with our classes is a class is a way to group certain styles together to make them more effective with each other. But what you can also do is have this element prefix. So before we look at the element prefix, why don't we make a class that is called header? Now this is a class I'm making up. Like this can be called anything you want it to be, like this, but you usually want descriptive names, right? Just to make sure that you know what is going on. So what I'll call it is, let me call it header, CS or something like this. That looks a bit more professional. And I'll call both of these classes to have a header CSS. Now, what we could do with our classes is inside of our style sheet up here at the top, where we have the CSS override, I can go ahead and say, okay, go ahead and grab my header class, And let's just make background color of this guy. I called it, you can call it whatever you'd like. I think it was called goldenrod I used. That was a nicer color. You can use whatever color you'd like. But essentially now, anytime, oops, sorry, not header class, sorry about that. It's header CSS. That's the name of my class that I created. So now what HTML will do is say, every time I see an element, it doesn't matter what element it is. It could be a P. And let's show you here. Call this one header CSS as well. Anytime I see that element, I'm going to apply the background color of goldenrod. Okay. Does this make sense to folks with this CSS? I think, Stefania, does that make sense? I just want to make sure we know this before we jump to the. Yes. Okay. Cool. Great. So this is the basic class here, and now what we could do is, you know what? I don't like the black. I want these guys to be different colors. And if we're using classes, it's a bit redundant to now create a style and then do color and all of it. So what you could do is pretty much put a prefix on your style. And what a prefix does is it will say, in the specific scenario where you have the class header CSS applied to a H1 element, which is what happens here, go ahead and do something unique. And what my unique thing was is making it a different color. Right. So now the header CSS is still applied to all the other guys, but the H1 in specific, because of this prefix, has this new color here. Okay. Dim gray, something like that. There we go. And you'll notice here that I didn't change the background color inside of this code. So what happens is CSS applies not only this one, but also what's over here only to a H1 element, right? Now, does this work for every header H1 element? Let's just check this out. Okay. So we see this is a test added in. Now what happens if I go ahead and add it to the class of header CSS? We'll see that's identical to the one above it there. Okay. So these are what element prefixes are, and the reason that we use them is that if you want to keep pretty much, let's just say that you have like 4 or 5 stylings that you want to keep identical, but you want to change one thing based on the style, in this scenario, the font color, this is how you would really do it. So header CSS is going to apply to all of them, but I can get a bit more specific with my heading 1 and heading 2. And make them more unique parameters. So now this one is crimson. Okay. Does that help a bit with element prefixes? That's probably the most you'll need to do with element prefixes. And the only reason we do them is that, like, you know, you might have a bunch of stuff in here that's the same. I don't know what other. Let's not get too complicated here. Let me just do font size larger, something like that. So now all of these will have these things applied to it in each one. But now they have the different colors there. Let me do 50%. Great. Putting the header underscore CSS. That's a custom class that we created. So essentially, it's referencing the class we made down here. So when we say custom class, if I call this HS, let me change these to be HS. You'll notice that it's defaulting back to what they were. So inside of our style sheet, what we say is, you know what? If you ever encounter a class that is called HS, go ahead and apply this stuff to it. Do you see how when I change it to VHS, oops, it applied one there? So that's essentially what that does for us. Oops. Cool. I'm going to change this back to header CSS. But again, the header CSS is something that we create on the fly. So the class equals is built in. but whatever you put into the string here is whatever you want it to be. Okay. So I want to make sure folks are getting the class because the ID that we're about to see is very similar to class. How's everyone feeling with classes? Sense? Does anyone need more further clarification?
I would before later on, but in private because they already answered. But I
Sure.
asked them right after I had it. Just
Okay. No worries. Okay. Otherwise, this sure. This is recorded again as well, so you guys do a double check on it. Awesome. Cool. So let's let me see here. Let me pull up one.
just putting the file again on the chat.
Yep.
Every time I get
Okay. No worries. Let's see here. There we go. Cool. So that's inside the chat again. There you go. Okay. And what I want to focus on next here, um, is this ID. So an ID is something where a class is something where it's like shared across a lot of things. An ID is a very specific class that you want to focus on. So essentially, in this scenario, an ID would be something where it's like, okay, I have, let's say that I have a bunch of header ones, and they're all belonging to this class, like so. Okay. Let me delete these guys there. All right. Make this a bit more unique. Okay. So I have a bunch of header ones in my code, and essentially you might be doing something for a website or one of the assignments you're asked to be like, edit only this specific instance of something. That's where your ID comes into play. So essentially, if I go ahead and I say something like, let's just say that I want the top header to be very different from the rest of them, even though it's belonging to this header CSS class, I could say something where it's like ID is equal to, and I can make up any ID I want to, right? You'll see here, there's a style rule that we'll use. If you're making a spaced ID, you use a hyphen on it. Not a huge issue. Essentially, what I want to focus on is that if I have an ID here, I could go ahead and say something like top level header. And again, everyone, this is not built into anything. This is something I'm making up for myself. Again, this could be called whatever it is, as long as it's the same wording. I wouldn't submit something like that. It would be a little weird. And what you could say now is down here, if I put a dot, I can now do the exact same thing to my item, but it will be a different, or excuse me, the exact same thing like my class, but it's going to be focused on an ID. And let's just say I'll do text align. Let me do left for this one. So what happens is that text align, it centers everything, but if I find a specific ID, it's going to put it to the left. Let me actually, this guy might actually be overwriting it really quick. Here we go. Oops. Okay, text align might not be doing it for me. Let me go ahead and just change the color one more time. And let's do yellow green or something. Cool. Double check. ID. Oops, that was my fault. Sorry. So for the ID, sorry. Let's see here. This one will do it. There we go. So for IDs, you'll notice I'll say I did that on purpose. So for IDs, we have a dot here. The dot is only for classes. When you're doing CSS with the classes, if you want to change the CSS of an ID, you use the pound sign. Okay. And if I use a pound sign, you'll notice here that my yellow green, let me make it that blue or something. We'll notice now that I still have the exact same logic of my class. I'm still applying the same color from header CSS and header 1 CSS. But now because I have this ID that's specific to the top one, I'm now changing that color as well. Okay. So again, you might be wondering, why do I use IDs over classes? I would say use classes to group general uh, similar things together. Use an ID for a very specific thing that you want to modify. Okay. And let me try to do a text align again of left. We'll see now that my header is moved to the left because I have the specific ID. Now, does it have to be on the top one? Nope. If I go ahead, let's see what happens if I do this here. You'll notice that it also applies the exact same logic to this one down here. However, this isn't good practice. Your IDs should usually be unique. If you want to share code between them, use a class. And IDs should be like singular instances. Okay, cool. And again, the main difference here is that we don't use a dot, we use a pound sign. And again, the we don't really have that H2 stuff in front of it. Go ahead and see it there. Let's see what happens if I apply this to a H2. Okay. So again, the same concept applies to IDs where you can do IDs with prefixes. So if I do H2.ID, then it will be that specific one. If I apply this ID to a regular header, it's not going to run because I don't have the regular one made up there. Okay. Usually though, this is good for IDs. So how are folks feeling with IDs and classes? I know the CSS is a lot at once, but in general, as long as you're understanding the text and the color and kind of how to make them, you'll be in good shape. I can toss this one into the chat as well. Here. Does anyone have any questions on this? Everyone's a web dev expert. Okay, cool. Yeah, practice. Yeah. Oh, okay. So again, let's just see. Uh, okay. So I won't, because I do want folks to get practice with the class and IDs. I just want to showcase a few more things. Let's see here. Need all these. Okay. So let's go from up here to after external CSS styles, we can kind of I'll let you guys practice. After our IDs, there's two little things here, span and div, that are a bit unique, and you can if you so in general, if you want to apply CSS to text that doesn't coincide with any of the HTML5 elements, you'll put that text in a span element or a div element. Now, essentially what that means is span and div are generic elements that they don't provide any meaning when they're used by themselves. They're specifically used for CSS. So what that means for us is that if I want to create unique text just for without having a paragraph tag or anything, I can do a span. Like so. So I have this hello world. This is inside a span. And again, a span and a div are just placeholders for us to work with this one here. So that's general what a div or a span does. You'll notice that let me pull up. Let's pull up a website here. Um, okay, this is our Moodle page for this. You'll notice that it might be looking a bit more similar now. We have a bunch of divs here, and then we might be able to find a span somewhere. Is there a span? There we go. Span class. Skip the block. Great. So, Puni, again, the span and div don't do anything by themselves. All they are is placeholders for you to apply CSS logic to. So essentially, they're generic elements. There is no special meaning to them. They are placeholder for CSS. And why you want to use them is essentially, if you see down here, I create a span, and let me do a div underneath it. Div like so. This inside a div. So basic elements there, and what you could do now essentially is you can either create a class to be applied for it to, or an ID. So I'll create a class. I'll call it unique span, something like that. And up here, I can go ahead and then, because this is a class, I could say unique span up here. The launched almond or something like that. And you'll see now that this span class there, and you can get creative with it where you could say like margin bottom, uh, 10 pixels. Oops, maybe we could try 10%. That won't work for me. Unfortunate. And then we could also try, let's try to change the color to goldenrod or something. Cool. And we'll see now this has changed the color as well. So again, what these guys do, unique spans and divs, because you might see them a lot, is they're generally used to group things together or to provide information, excuse me, or for something to be applied to class to. So that's in general what a span does, or divs. So span and divs serve the same purpose. They're placeholders for CSS. Cool.
Can I have different elements under the same class?
Yep, absolutely. So different elements with the same class. So yeah, so what we could do there is we actually have that here. Let me go ahead and in class blue, so I have a p tag. Up here, I have this h1 class called this is a test.
Example, if I want to have a settings that were made by the manager. The manager decided on color, font, background color. That's going to be my class.
Yep. Yeah. Okay.
During my code, I'm saying like, oh, this A1, this header one, this B, this whatever I'm doing down this image is going to have like all of this is going to be affected by what the manager wants, and now all of them are going to have all the settings from the manager, from the text that the manager.
Yeah. So yeah, but let's actually call this up. So if I create a class, let me say the h1 class called manager, and let's just make this very obvious here. So if this is the class, what we need to do again is in our CSS, we define the term again of manager. Let's just say that it's like a very important class, so you want to make it obvious that that it's there. We'll call it purple background color, rosy brown or something. That's fine. Size. Oh, excuse me. Font size. Let's do like extra large to make it very obvious that we're here. And you'll see here that now, can I do triple egg? How many X's can I go? Oh, okay, I guess this needs to the large one. So that's my test there. So that's good. And again, the question was, can I apply it to different classes? So yeah, if I go down here to this paragraph and let's say this hello world is there, you'll see here. Oh, you'll. Sorry, no worries. So what you could do here now inside of my paragraph tag is that it's also similar to the header there, and that's just because it's the same class. So again, I have this class called paragraph. Even for my HR, HR might be a bit different. Sometimes these apply and sometimes they don't. But in general, you can apply it to these guys. And let's look at our span as well. If I change my span class to be of class manager, we'll also get the same thing. But you'll notice that the edges are cut off because it's not taking the full width of it. But technically, Sullivan, this top one is a header one. This is a span element, and this is a paragraph element. And they're all using the same class there. And the difference, so this is where IDs or prefixes come in. Let's say that the manager doesn't want the paragraphs to be large like that. What you can say now is you say, okay, if I have a paragraph that is a part of the manager class, I can now say something like font size is equal to, let's just make it large. And do you see here now my font size for the paragraph is smaller because every paragraph that contains a manager class is on. You can also do it in the same way. Let's say I want to change this span. What you could do after you apply the class of span to it, you can now create an ID specific to this instance of this class. And what you could do now with your ID, this is kind of like a different way. Like you can technically do it like this as well, span.manager. But let's say that you don't want to change every single span. Let me do that this way as well. Okay.
Calling manager, would you mind calling like I don't know,
Sure.
so it's like very clear?
Yeah, absolutely. So peach. Let's go here. And so now if I need to determine my ID, I don't use periods with IDs. I use the pound sign with ID. So now I'm saying the ID of called peach, go ahead and change the font size to be extra small. Now we'll see here, this looks really weird because it's there, but you'll see that now I have two spans on top of each other. And the one with the term of peach on it is actually a lot smaller. And the one that doesn't have the ID of peach is the same size. Again, what happens if I apply an ID equal to peach to this guy? It does the same thing for us. Okay. And everyone, this is where this is where CSS works. How should I know what do I have to use? Oh, okay, great. Great question. So if you're making a class, if you're using the word class and you're making the name, you have to use the dot up here. The period mark denotes a class. If you're making an ID, like you are here with Peach, should we like here? Oh, this is Peach as well. What happens then is that you need to use the pound sign. So essentially, we do it this way, like that. So the pound sign is associated with an ID, and the dot associated with a class. Now, can you do prefixes for IDs? Yeah, you can do prefixes for IDs as well. So here I made the ID for H1 of Peach. If I do H1 pound sign Peach, font size extra large, we'll now see that I have the normal large text again. Those are prefixes. Don't worry too much about prefixes. If prefixes are a little confusing, I much rather focus on getting just the general dots and the pound signs down. So again, dots are for classes, pound signs are for IDs. It's not that I forget to.
After that, but like, what's the difference between them? Like, one should
Nice.
one should ID?
So I would say for the homework and in general, you're gonna use more classes because classes, essentially, as you said, if you have a manager that says I want everything to be styled this way, that's a class. But let's just say that you have a scenario like you have up here where the manager is like, I want every header on the page to be centered except for the very top one. Then that very top one would get an ID because the header still shares the same type of styling as the other guys, but it has one thing a little bit different. And if it has one thing a little bit different, you should do an ID. That's usually how it goes. You can technically do IDs for everything as well, though. It's but like the general practice is that classes I think are easier to look at with the dots. The pound signs are kind of more rare to occur. Like IDs aren't as rare, and we can see here. Um, Actually, I might take that back based on the code I'm looking at here. You'll see here as well. They're both kind of used in actual like this is your Moodle page. You'll see here that we have some classes, the content classes there. Let's see here. This one also has a class. And then once you keep getting into like the actual meat of it, though, oh yeah, I guess these guys are spans as well. There's some IDs there too. So like, this guy, this UL has an ID of a random group. So usually that might have a different styling or something. And you'll see here that styling is usually margins in actual websites, but for our purposes of this class, it'll be more like color coding and stuff. Okay, cool. So let me drag this updated file into here. This HTML file is getting more advanced. You can see the size of it increasing. So now, um, and again, span and div, everyone, if you're not using them all the time, that's fine. General idea is that they're just placeholders for you to edit as text. So they're kind of just placeholders for CSS. That's all you really need to know about them. Cool. Now, the last thing I want to focus on, and then I can let y'all get practice with it, is the concept of cascading. And again, the term with cascading and what this comes from with cascading style sheets are how our rules are defined. So when we say cascade, we kind of say like this like flow of things that are going on. Essentially, there's various places where the CSS rules can be defined, and there's a priority of them. So you can kind of think of it as stacking plates. So the fifth or the least prioritized place is the browser's native default settings, which means that if you open up Google Chrome, or Mozilla Firefox, or Microsoft Edge, there's going to be, okay, the text is Times New Roman and the size is 12 points. If there's at any point settings inside of the browser installation that you modified, those are picked. Now, if the browser opens it up and there's an external CSS file, which is what we're going to be doing, that gets priority over these two. If there's a style container, which is what we just made up here, that's the second prioritized one. And the one that gets the most priority of anything is that if you add a style element into the style attribute into the element. That's the most prioritized. So again, the priority that we'll need to worry about is style attribute, style header container, or an external file. So again, why do we need to remember that? Well, you can create an external file, and if you don't like how some color looks, you can come up, you don't want to worry about editing the entire CSS file. You can come up to the style section of your header and say dot ID is changed to something else, and then that's fine. Okay. So this is what we meant by cascading. CSS cascading, there's a different flow of levels that we need to get to. And that's usually the most evident of it. We've already dealt with style a bit earlier. Sorry about that. I kind of threw that at us pretty early. But again, this is a global attribute, which means it can be used at any element. So anything that is an attribute or an element in HTML has a style attribute. And you can also go ahead and edit that style container with it too. Nice. So let's just say that I'm dealing with this. We can see here that my CSS file is getting pretty massive already. So let's go ahead. I think I have it saved in the chat, hopefully. So let's see what happens if I do this. So let's delete all our work. See here. And get a kind of uglier website now, right? So all my styling is gone. And usually if you download it from a website or you do something like that, that's let me edit back for the time being. What will happen is that's what will come with HTML files is this separate file. So what I'm going to do is, let me see if I can do this together on the fly there. Let's see here. If I go ahead, let's see if we can do this together. If I go ahead and hit new, I'm going to try to make a new text document. If you can't do this, I'll share it with you in the file. I'm going to call this practice CSS. What I'll do inside of here is I'm going to save as the practice CSS file. I'm going to change it to all files. I'm going to save this as a .css file. Nice. Now, do folks see how in my type it says CSS source file? Let me go to properties, CSS source file. Did this work? Cool. So now I have this empty file. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm actually just going to grab up my CSS code, delete it from here. I'm going to plop it into this file. Now, if you aren't able to get this working, what I'll do for you is I'm just going to toss that CSS file into that so you can download it into your end. And let's go ahead and let's see if this is running for it. Now, unfortunately, it seems like my CSS isn't running. So what we're doing here is this external style sheet, and there's a specific bit of code that that is dedicated to doing this. So in your header, outside of style, so not inside of style, but just in its own thing, what you're going to make is um, a new element, and the element is called link. Okay, it's here. Now, a link is going to contain a bit of things inside of it. It's going to contain two main attributes. The first one is this thing called REL. REL is kind of this reference point for link. So the link is going to ask, what do you want me to relate this item to? What you're going to say is this keyword that says style sheet. So you're saying, okay, HTML, open up and link this thing as a style sheet. And what are we going to be linking? We're going to be linking the practice underscore CSS dot CSS file there. That's a bit redundant. Let me actually just call this file practice as well. So what you'll see, this is where it gets a little confusing, is that because these files are named the same thing, but because of their type, they're technically different. So the computer will know what the difference is. Um, I'm gonna call this I'm gonna call this practice style. Let me add this one instead of underscore CSS. And what I could say now in here, okay. Now practice CSS is instead going to be called practice styles.css. Okay. Now if I go ahead and I refresh my web page, does everyone see how I got all the CSS back that I had before? That's essentially what this linking does for us. Okay. Now, how come our href is able to be in this location right here? Well, it's because it's in the exact same directory as this guy. What I mean by that is if I go ahead and I create another folder called test, and I put this guy in it, you don't need to worry about this. I just wanted to show it. I don't get to a lot. So if I do test like that, I can now say test flash, and I just need to add a folder in there. For the time being, though, just worry about getting it linked up like so. This is the Yeah, so I changed the name to practice styles.css. So I linked it into chat. If you look at the most recent chat message from me, there's a CSS file called practice styles here. Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so let me, I had, yep, yep. Practice styles.css. That's what the file is called. Style, style feed in REL is telling the HTML code essentially what this file is a style sheet. That's what that code does. So it's like, if I actually delete this, let's see what happens if I delete this guy. Do you see how it doesn't work? We also get this weird error up here with this arrow. So essentially what you need to say to HTML is, hey, this practice styles.css that you have right here is the style sheet. And once no, this has to be style sheet. So anytime you're linking an external style sheet, it is what will change here, Sullivan, is the name of your style sheet. That's the only thing that will change. This code here is always going to be the same. And you'll see here, do you see how if I look at this one, it's actually the exact same code. Link REL style sheet. href is different though. Okay. And now if I refresh it, Now this guy's working again. Okay. Not the best looking website, but it's got some styles on it. Cool. Nice. And again, sorry for changing the names up, but again, this is kind of these two files here that are linked together. Now, as you'll see here that I don't put anything inside of this file besides my CSS. I have nothing at the top, nothing at the bottom. You could just type CSS directly in here. And as a quick test here, so pop quiz, let's go ahead and say I'm in my style sheet up here. My h1.header underscore CSS color is dim gray. This guy dim gray. What do folks think will happen? What color do folks think this will be now? Is it going to be dim gray or is it going to be aquamarine? Nice, awesome. Because what's happening is we cascaded, right? The guy, this header gets more priority than whatever's in the CSS file sheet. This does run and it's made, but this gets overwritten. Now, as one last little test here, where was it? h1.header. Oops. Okay. What color do we think this will be now? If we refresh this, now it's crimson. Okay. Because this guy, or excuse me, this style also gets the most priority. So this is kind of how the priority works for us. This is made, but it's getting overwritten here, which in turn is getting overwritten down here. Don't worry too much about the overwrites, but again, this is just kind of the flow of the cascading. That's why they're called cascading style sheets for that one. Okay.
And is does it matter if the link is before or after style?
Great. Let's go ahead and actually practice that real quick. So what I'll do here is I'm actually going to go ahead and delete from this guide style. We'll see here that it actually does matter. So usually the good practice is that you always do this first because it's supposed to cascade. But what happens here is that this code runs first, right? So it applies this color to it, but then it runs this snippet of code, and then the HTML is like, okay, I'm going to open it. What color is this supposed to be? It's supposed to be dim gray. So now it's dim gray instead of the aquamarine. Again, as an example of this, if I put the guy up here, oops, sorry, he's now aquamarine. If I put him down here, he's now dim gray. Okay.
Is there any ethic on building code so to create what is it called, labyrinth, like a maze?
Sure. So you don't want to like confuse because the good thing is like make sure that people aren't confused. The basic ethics are like go-to things I would say is always link your style sheet at the very top of your header. That's number one. Your style sheet should always come first because in general, you never want to really do stuff like this. You don't want to say style is equal to it inside of there. Not too often. It's just like more code that's not readable. If you ever want to override anything in your file, you should do it inside the header style sheet up here. So if you have a very and then call it last. Yeah, and always call your style sheet first. Get the basic styles because again, once you have more than 5 attributes that you're changing, you should make a dedicated style sheet for it. That's also easier. And also organize it like in the names, make names that are like meaningful to them. What? Yeah.
To
Yes. Uh-huh.
but
Sure. So like having multiple classes together.
yes, inside a class.
Yeah, so I would say usually you're going to work with multiple classes. For the homework stuff for today, doing one is fine, but to showcase that, what we could also do, let's see here. This is a header class.
Like in web page.
That- yeah,
website, okay? And you have finance, you have uh, pictures, right? And you have like all these different sections from the website.
yeah,
And you can say, okay, I want to edit the entire text on finance.
yeah,
So I'm going to have a huge that is going to contain everything on finance.
yeah,
And if I edit inside finance, there's going to be like people, and then the inside people there's going to be secretary, and then inside secretary there's going to be rookies,
yeah,
like that. And only a rookie that goes finance uh, secretary dot rookie, all separated by dot.
yeah. That would so if you're trying to do classes within classes, um, I would say let's see here. So usually if you're doing multiple classes, what will happen is that let's just see here. Let's apply the blue in the class to a new paragraph up here. Let's do a new key. See like this one. So see how I get this is a multi-class paragraph. I have it's in red because I applied P to be red. So now if I go ahead and hit blue here, we'll see here that my red color applies the white and then this red background. Let me try to do red and blue here, and we'll see that it's not really overriding it there. So if you're doing multiple classes inside of it, what I would say instead of having it be the single div, or I guess you said like a single massive section of it, this is kind of where your spanners and your headers could come into play. Let me show you. If I do blue, let me see here, like so. Let's see what this will do for us. Do you see here, Sullivan, how now this specific guy has a blue text with a white background? So what I would say instead of doing a massive class, because even now I'm actually getting errors where my blue is being ignored if I do blue and red, or if I do red and blue, it's not popping up as blue as we thought. Like not all of it is blue. This is where your divs and your spanners come into play. So if you have a specific section in a large div of sections, I would say you can apply the span class to that guy there. And as you said, if you have something where it's like um university dot footer dot um sorry I forgot that block. So like if you're like if you're 3 level classes in, I would say don't create a style sheet that has like it won't be something where it's like blue dot red dot class 3. What I would say is just keep track of what each one is doing. And so, for instance, these guys override each other's colors, so I wouldn't want to use them in the same place. I would instead try to do something like this. Let's see what happens if I remove the red from it there. We'll notice that the entire background is red. If I now remove this, let me keep red and blue here. We'll see that it's actually applying it much better than, let's go ahead and delete this. So now I'm applying the two classes where I have blue text from the blue class and a red background from the red class. So you can apply multi-classes like this. But as you're saying, if you're embedded in classes, make sure that your classes don't like, as you said, like a labyrinth of things. There's no point in having one class change a color and then later have it change it again. Like try to make sure that they're kind of aligned. And that's where the classes you should really have like a big like you can call it like I forgot like a god class or something that really does most of the work that needs to happen, and then you could have mini classes that like change one or two things there. So, does does that help a bit with the
Yes, and
sir?
then on the God, and then the angels. What?
Yeah, right. Yeah, made this very religious.
Uh,
Go. Yeah, always. Mhm. Sure. So, yeah, always the guy that does the most work first, and then to whichever one there. Because again, what happens to, I mean, in this scenario, it doesn't really matter because I'm applying the blue and red text. But in a scenario where it does matter, always put down the class that does the most of the work for you.